Hi folks, welcome to the Prepared Homestead. This is Travis. Thank you all for stopping by to watch. I think I might hear some thunder off in the distance. We got a little bit of rain this morning. Originally, it was supposed to be a whole lot more, and it wasn't that much. But they are calling for more this afternoon, this evening, and tomorrow. So we'll see. Hopefully, in fact, I looked at the weather forecast for the weekend. Looks really great, like down in the mid to low 80s. I mean, we've been in the 90s, and you know, humidity 50, 70, 80%. It's been a little stuffy around here. But anyways, we might get a break this weekend. I'm going to just kind of briefly mention something, because this isn't the topic for today, but the Biden administration has announced today that they've discussed, they've analyzed things, they've they've had their little meetings, the campaign meetings and meetings at the White House, and Biden has announced that he is absolutely running for office. He is not backing down. He is not stepping down. There's been a lot of rumors over the last couple of days, and he said he's not doing it. Now, of course, things could change, right? Things could change, but as of right now, he's reiterated that he is in this, and that he's going to finish this race all the way to the end, and he claims he's going to win and all this kind of stuff. Now, shortly after that, it was in the news that a fourth case of human contracted H5N1 bird flu had been discovered here in the United States, number 4. I'm sure it's a coincidence. It's just a coincidence, folks. Just go about your daily chores, your daily business. But it was shortly after that was announced. So I don't know if you're interested in that whole coffee cough pandemic thing that might be happening, and wanting to know more of my opinion, because it's YouTube, and if you remember the last 4 years, you can't really talk about that much over here. Go over to my locals. There's a link down in the description below. You can sign up for free, but a lot of the content I put over there is behind the paywall. I know a lot of people hate that, but it's free speech. It's a great platform, and if you want to sign up, it's $3 a month or $30 a year. I think it's a really good deal, and the day that YouTube says to me, that's where you'll find me. I want to shift gears dramatically from what we've been talking about a lot lately because of all the stuff going on, and let's get back to some basics of prepping and homesteading, because in the end, that's what's really important. And I want to talk to you about dealing with crime, dealing with thugs, bad guys, whatever you want to call it, after SHTF, especially from a rural perspective. That's my focus in this on this channel. And so while it may be a little bit different in the city, I think most of you kind of have a pretty good idea of what it's going to be like in the city. So let's talk about that. Now, I know the immediate knee-jerk reaction, which isn't necessarily wrong, is, well, you use your gun and you protect yourself, right? Well, yes, but that may not always be there's just more to it, okay? So hear me out. Because the best way to win a fight is to be able to avoid it altogether. And so when you live out in the rural areas, you know, especially once things, sorry, I got something, just feel like it went into my eye. The best, you know, when things fall apart, law enforcement may not be around, or at least as much. Crime could definitely increase. Bad people could do more things. And just because I live out in the middle of nowhere doesn't mean that I am completely isolated and protected from that. It may be a lot less than if I lived in the middle of St. Louis or Chicago or Kansas City or Dallas or Houston or New York or Seattle or any of those other places. But it's still there. And the possibility of it getting worse is also still there. So I think it's definitely worth talking about, because just saying, well, I'm going to just use my gun and shoot everybody, that may not be the best idea, because even though many of you might disagree with me on this one, I don't think that there's a good chance that whatever collapse we go through will mean that there's no government. There will be government somewhere. It may be at the end of the line. You shoot someone for trespassing, and you may get prosecuted. It's just like back in the old West cowboy days, right? It seemed like it was a lawless West, right? It wasn't lawless. They weren't out there trying to prevent crime, and they weren't really responding to crime, but they were going out there and finding the criminals as best as they could and throwing them in jail or hanging them or whatever it was. So there was law, and eventually it caught up to the people doing bad things. And so we have to remember that you can't just have this, mindset that, oh, when it falls apart, I'm going to mow everyone down that steps onto my property or whatever. A lot of it is prevention, and working with your neighbors, and then also just being aware of what's around you. In the bigger cities, it's very possible, very likely, that the majority of the people will kind of stay in those bigger cities. They're probably so conditioned, they may not have ever been much out into the countryside, in the small rural areas, and so they won't know what to do, so they're going to stay in those areas. But your small towns, for instance, where I live, there are small towns around within a drive, and it's very possible that those people may come out into the country. If the food and resources dry up in the small towns, they all have families, out in the rural areas, and they've been out there, and many of them grew up, even though they live in the cities. They may come out. So you're going to have that also. The big advantage of living out like this is that there's a lot less people. And statistically, the less people there are, the less crime there is, right? But there's going to be more crime just out of desperation also, and we have to be prepared for that. One of the first things that you should be doing is reconning your area, your AO, your area of operation. You should have a pretty good awareness of where you're living, of kind of what kind of people, as best as you can summarize in your area. That doesn't mean that you're going around and you're doing background checks on everyone, but there are websites that can show you crime statistics in your area. Sometimes if it's a real rural area, they may not be super accurate, but a lot of times you can look at the county and figure out what the crime is in your county. And then you just need to spend some time driving around on little side roads. You see me driving around on the little gravel roads, going around and just seeing the kind of people that live. Now, you can't always judge a book by its cover. I get it. But you can get at least a good idea of what's in the book by looking at the cover. And, if you see people that, and how they live, and, you kind of get an idea. Like, that one right there might be a problem, right? And then that's also a good, just getting to know what goes on. If you live in a rural area and there's little general stores, little mom and pop shops, get to know the people there, get to know the people that hang out in there. And it's very common in very rural areas, the little hardware store, the little convenience store, the little feed store, the locals hang out there and they talk. And it doesn't mean that you should get there and you should gossip and stuff, but you should hang out ever so often so that you can kind of hear stories, and you'll hear stories. There's also things like little Facebook groups. It's not that I'm promoting Facebook, but most all of these little rural areas, they have Facebook groups where they just share stuff. And, you get on there and they'll talk about, oh, so-and-so, watch him. He's a dope head. He steals stuff out all the time. They do that. On Facebook in these little small rural area groups. And so that kind of stuff all adds to your recon, where you're developing the intelligence profile for the area that you're living in, so that you have a good idea of the type of people that live around you. You have a good idea of the levels of crime around you, getting to know. This is all part of developing community and relationships with your neighbors. You're getting to know them, and then they're telling you. Maybe you're new to an area, and your neighbor down the road has lived there his whole life. Become friends with him, develop a relationship, help him out, earn his trust at least a certain level, and then he's going to start talking, and do that with several people. And so you want to figure out what's around you, depending on where you live and the population concentration, at least a 3 to 5 mile radius around you is a good idea. Start from the center of where you work or where you live, and start working your way out and developing some good intelligence on the people that live around you. It's also a good way to figure out the roads, ways to get in and out of places, quick exits, all that kind of stuff. Places and that crime might be, if it's some dark little lonely dirt road that no one lives down, that's going to be probably where the, lower, life people live or hang out and do their things. So that's the first thing. You also want to, like I said, build relationships with people around you. All of my neighbors around me, we all have a really good working relationship, and we have standing agreements, like verbal agreements, shaking hands, verbal agreements, that if my neighbor, something bad happens, I'm going to come to his rescue, and he will do the same to me. In fact, I've joked with a couple of them that, when they call and say they need some help, basically my only question is, do I bring tools or do I bring a gun? And that's kind of how it is out here. So that way you have, they may not be necessarily a mag. They're just your neighbors. That's just what neighbors do. So build that relationship with people. Work on your own perimeter defense. If it's a common thing, and I don't understand people that do this, but out in the country, people want to build close to the road. I mean, that reason, it's usually cheaper to bring electricity off the road. The further you go away from the main road, the more expensive it is, because you've got to bring that power up back there. But they build close to the road, and everyone wants to have a nice, picturesque place that they can brag to everyone, that they can look special, right? It's all cleared, it's manicured, this nice, beautiful home. You can see your cars, you can see your fancy tractor, you see all this stuff. And what it looks like is that you have things and that you're wealthy. And I'm not telling you that you should look like you're, trailer trash poor, but don't brag to everyone. If you happen to live closer to the road, you might consider allowing the areas, the ditches or the areas along the road to kind of grow up naturally, create a natural visual barrier. And it can even be a physical barrier, especially out here. There's so many blackberries and other thorny type of vines and stuff. You let that grow up along that fence row, and it's going to be very difficult to get through it, okay? You would have to be very, very motivated to try to tear through some of the blackberry fence rows and vines and stuff that you see out here. So create a visual barrier if you can. And while, yes, you want your place to look nice, I don't think most people nowadays should be probably making it look like some kind of brag book, magazine looking stuff. Don't be displaying all of your stuff. If your neighbors can see you, or if people can see you from the road, do your best to try to be gray man at your own home, right? Even to the point that depending on where you live, depending on how much of your property and your home can be seen by, say, a road or a highway or something like that, even displaying things like, patriotic flags and stuff like that. I don't know. We're kind of in that gray man period. So you want to kind of think of that kind of stuff. And then also work on developing the defense for your property. Do you have certain things, maybe piles of wood, wood piles or rock piles or other things set in certain ways that you could use them as a cover? I've talked about this, place to get behind if you ever were attacked. And then also making it more difficult for people to come onto your property. Like I said, if the front of your property is nice and mowed, they can come in from any direction. If you keep only certain areas that you have control over, or better control over, mowed and everything, then it's more likely they're going to come there. Bad people are lazy for the most part. They're not like they are on TV. And they're going to take the path of least resistance, and they're going to prey on the weakest ones. So it's this balance of gray man, but yet not looking too weak. Probably the best thing is to not look like you have too much, Gardens, that's another thing. If you have large gardens and fruit trees and stuff, if you're able to conceal them, if you're able to plant them in areas that people from the road may not be able to see, that's a good idea. Of course, that's not possible for everyone, but if you're able to do that, that would be a good idea. Thinking about these things I think are very important, because this idea of just, well, I'm just going to take my gun and I'm going to shoot people. I'm not opposed to that if it's necessary, but you want to try to avoid that at all cost. The average person that's never had to take a life will most likely have a lot of psychological hurdles to overcome if they have to do it. And so if at all possible, you should avoid it. Now, I understand if the threat is thrust upon you, then yes, you should react and you should take care of and protect what's yours. But if you can avoid it, you should. And also the fact that you may not be defending against one or even two or three targets. You could be defending against a half a dozen or more targets. And no matter how good you are, if you're dealing with 6, 10, 12 people, you're at a great disadvantage. And so trying to avoid the fight and trying to keep people from interested in coming to where you're at are some really good ideas that you should be working on. Because crime will happen out in the rural areas. There are meth heads, there are, people that steal things. They don't steal things that much in a lot of areas like, say, here, because they know people carry and they know how they will be dealt with. But when it's all hitting the fan and everything's falling apart and they can't go get their welfare checks or their food baskets or things like that because things have kind of fallen apart, they can turn to theft of your property, your livestock, poaching on your property, or even taking from you directly. So you definitely want to have a plan for this. And again, the best part, the first thing that you should work on in your plan is how to avoid the threat if at all possible. And then, of course, have a very distinct definition of when it's time to no longer avoid and to take that threat on face first. And if you do that, and I believe when you take on a threat, you should take it on with all the force and all the aggression and all the energy that you can possibly muster. And you hit it hard and fast the first time, and then you have a pretty good chance of overcoming even overwhelming threats. But the first thing you should do is try to avoid it. There's nothing weak in doing that. Your first priority is to not just protect your family in that moment, but to continue protecting and providing for your family even after that moment has passed. And you're not going to be able to do that if you're not there. Folks, it's time to get your houses in order and to prepare yourselves mentally, physically, and spiritually. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.